So our next guest is not only an incredible entrepreneur, an incredible builder, but someone who is so thoughtful about innovation, about disruption, but also about creating more opportunities. There was this quote that he talks about with his father that for someone to live a meaningful life, they have to create more opportunity for others. And if you track this next guest's career, you see in every aspect of what he's done, he not only built something for himself, but invited others in. In fact, at the end of the interview, when we say congratulations for this crazy career and everything you've done, he immediately says, well, I've had incredible partners. He talks about people and human capital and the importance of working with the very best people. He also has this incredible desire to get to the facts. He doesn't care about your opinion, he cares about the data.
We're talking about Mike Milken, and Mike Milken had two incredible careers. The first was in finance, where he democratized finance. He created a high-yield bond, leverage buyouts. He made it so that it wasn't about who you knew, but what you can do. He bet on people. He created industries, Ted Turner, the telecom industry. I mean, things that we take for granted today, Mike Milken spearheaded, and he does the same thing in medical research and has funded billions of dollars in education, medical research. This is a remarkable individual who has changed the world.
He talks about, at 11 years old, writing a letter to Eisenhower about him taking over the space program. An 11-year-old, having the audacity to do so. He talks about how he's built this incredible organization with the Milken Institute. He talks about philanthropy.
Yeah,
and then he does such great detail in this stuff.
And then he gives us insights on the future. I mean, this guy can see around corners, and what he told us there was really neat.
It was unbelievable. I mean, you said, tell us what we need to know for the future. And he goes into detail about 5 different pillars of exactly how he's thinking about the future of investing, the future of innovation, the future of entrepreneurship. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Milken.
Let's go.
Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team in. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. I done kept it real from the jump.
David asked you earlier your secret to marriage, and you talked about you've married
56 years.
6 years. You talked about shared values. We want to go way back to the beginning, and we want to understand, in your words, is it Mike or Michael? What do you prefer?
Either.
Okay.
Did you feel you were living the American dream and you had to give back to others? Is that why you did philanthropy so young in life?
I think the concept of everyone having a chance, that a lot of people that are successful, President Clinton said, I feel your pain, okay? But they understand and they see the world through other people's eyes. And I think in many ways that has been my focus my whole life. You try to put yourself in that other person's position, see how they're seeing the world. Something might be extremely important to you, but it's of no importance to them. And when you tell a person they have cancer, if you have a doctor tell you you have cancer, what we discovered is most people don't think about anything for the next 30 minutes. Whatever they tell you after they tell you you have cancer, you don't remember. And so it's often important to have another person with you. And so seeing the people and the world through their eyes gives you a much different perspective. And at a young age, I saw that world. I was lucky enough to go to a school that was a 6-year school. It was the only really school in the city that was 6 years. So when I was 12, I was going to school with 18-year-olds.
Wow.
Okay? And they had a tendency to put the 12-year-olds head first into the trash cans just to initiate you when you came to school. Now,
Were you a big kid?
I was as taller than I am now when I was 12.
Okay.
Before the weight of the world was on your shoulders?
Yes, before the weight of the world. No, I actually thought I was going to be a basketball player part-time. So in 9th grade, I was all-city player. So I went from center to forward to guard to the bench to the stands. 5 consecutive years. But no, I think it was very important. I've always was involved with numbers. My father had a small accounting firm. He was both a lawyer and accountant.
Not a doctor.
Almost-
It's almost, yeah. Not bad. Close
His
second.
parents would have been almost proud.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's interesting. He really had only one thing that his parents had given him, and that was a Bulova watch. And he paid for almost his entire year during the Depression going to the University of Wisconsin with a Bulova watch.
Wow.
Now, today, maybe that's worth $30. And so it gives you a relative feeling of what's happened with inflation, et cetera. But so family was always very important to us. And living modestly was important. I would say, we were lower middle class to middle class at the time.
Did you feel that growing up? Did you feel lower middle class? Or did you feel like you had everything you needed?
Well, I had the good fortune, and that's why I was saying, to go to this school that ranged from very wealthy to very poor. And it gives you an interesting perspective on what people think, how they live, what's important. I started giving speeches at a young age, et cetera, and was very entrepreneurial.
What would you speak
like
about?
the two of you?
What would you speak about?
I spoke on many topics, okay? Financial, what it meant to be an entrepreneur.
Wow.
This is it in your teens?
Maybe when I was 10 or 11.
Wow.
Hey everyone. Big Shot is not just a passion project to us, where we archive Jewish entrepreneurial history.
It's a way to fight hate speech and anti-Semitism by telling memorable stories that allow people to connect and understand one another better.
We know stories can bring people together, and these are the stories that have never been told before. And this is a chance to see people like you've never seen them before.
Think about David Rubenstein, who started as the son of a postman but built a $400 billion business. Or Izzy Sharp, who started with one hotel more than 50 years ago and today has built one of the greatest hotel chains in the world in the Four Seasons.
Telling these stories and archiving Jewish entrepreneurial history is not just a job for two people.
We're looking for others who want to help preserve the lessons of Jewish icons.
We're looking for people who want to help us build this archive and can be part of the Big Shot family.
If you want to be an executive producer and you want to help fund Big Shot,
Please fill out the form below on this video.
we're chasing a dream and we're looking for others who feel the same obligation as us.
Who feel the same passion and responsibility as we do to archive our history, to fight hate, and to bring people together.
So you're doing cash flow statements, balance statements, and you're also giving speeches.
Well, wait, and your real dream is to work for NASA, right? Is space.
So is your father giving you this this confidence, this internal, hey Mike, if you want to give a speech and you're 10 years old, you go ahead and do it. Hey Mike, if you want to learn how to create a cash flow statement, here's how you do it.
Hey, Mike, if you want to be a 10-year-old Renaissance man.
Yeah, did your dad
how you
give
do
that
it.
confidence?
Well, my
Hard
mother,
work.
I say my mother was more outgoing than my father. She grew up in a upper middle class family. She went to the University of Wisconsin as a freshman. My father was finishing law school, so there was a difference of 7 years. And her father, her grandfather died when she was very young, and her father, at 12 or 13, became an entrepreneur.
Wow.
And took care of the family. So it's a lot of us don't really reflect on what a family unit was like at a different point in time in history. And I often, point out that the greatest achievement of humankind is probably the extension of life. 1 out of every 2 children born in 1900 died before their 5th birthday. So when we hear about people dying early and things like that, it seems unnatural to us today. But even in the United States in 1900, 1 in 5 kids died before their 5th birthday.
We definitely want to get into that. I mean, what you've done in healthcare is incredible. But I can't help but think, because Harley has 2 kids, I have 3 kids, and my 10-year-old can barely think past the next Coca-Cola that they want to drink. Here you are, saying you're a precocious kid is an understatement. Seems like you had a fairly regular middle-class American upbringing. How did you learn such a powerful lesson, like learn to see the world through other people's eyes? Was that innate to you? Was there a story there? Like, I'm amazed that you knew that at such a young age.
Well, the San Fernando Valley is part of Los Angeles, more than 2 million people here. It would be a city larger than Dallas. And it was individuals who couldn't really afford to live in West Los Angeles at the time. And so as they all moved there, you had this diaspora of individuals, of aspirational families, generally strong family units that had children and wanted the best for their children. So that generation in America is often known as the most caring generation. They had lived through the Depression. They had lived through World War II. And I am the oldest of the baby boomers, the 1946 group. And they told their children they could be anything they wanted to be. So it was extremely aspirational for their children. They, in their lifetime, were highly dependent on government support during the Depression, government during World War II, and the wars that they had lived through, whereas they felt that their children, and you'd be surprised of when you went and look at who was born in 1946, the first year after the war, just how entrepreneurial they are. The only year that 3 presidents were born in the history of the United States is 1946.
Wow. Remarkable.
That's the only year.
Wow.
Clinton, Trump, and Bush were all born in 1946.
Wow.
But if you go through that group, the war was over, good times were in front of us, the parents were extremely aspirational. And there are events, that changed your life. For me, the first dramatic event was kind of discovering my father had polio. And he never spoke about it, and we were playing football in the street.
How old are you at that point?
I just don't remember. I'd say 9 or 10. I just don't remember. And one of the kids says, what's wrong with your dad? He has a limp. I never noticed he had a limp. And because it was that way from the day I remembered. And I never thought, boy, he's never wear shorts in his life. But one of his legs had been not fully grown because he had polio. But he competed in sports, and he was a good dancer, etc. But then I sat down, and he talked to me about polio. So then that was my first real focus on healthcare. What was polio? Why did it happen? What occurred? It was declared an epidemic. And no more than 60,000 people got polio. And the country was preparing for these iron lung hotels. And you just think of a huge room that maybe had 100 iron lungs in it, keeping people alive so they could breathe. And so I guess that was my first real. The next major change is I was 11 and Sputnik went up.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah.
And I think the two of you are too young really to know, but the headlines in the papers were, the world is now more afraid any time since Pearl Harbor. And this was the middle of the Cold War, and if you could send a satellite up that goes around the Earth, you could drop nuclear bombs all over the place.
Right.
And this led to the building of bomb shelters. It led to duck and cover drills.
Right, hide under your desk.
Right. So my first major confrontation, I remember, in 5th grade was with my teacher, who was trying to convince me if a nuclear bomb landed in Hesby Street School, I'd be safe under my desk. And I wouldn't be safe if I didn't get under the desk if a nuclear bomb hit our school, okay? So it took about, 3 or 4 days when we reached a compromise that I wouldn't disrupt the class and she wouldn't try to convince me that I'd be safe under the desk if a nuclear bomb hit.
Did you know, here you are, this 10, 11, 12-year-old kid who's writing President Eisenhower to run the space program, who can do cash flows and P&L statements, who's reading the almanac. Did you know that you weren't like the regular kids in your class? I mean, I can't imagine many kids your age.
Or debating with their teacher whether
Right.
or not hiding under the desk would
No, I would say, in my family, we often sat around the table at dinner and debated the current events of the day and everything. And so it was a very worldly discussion as to how you felt. And I would say the real interesting breakthrough I had is if I did all these financial statements, and anyone whose mother or father had a small accounting firm, the whole family was engaged, that I got to visit his clients. My deal was, okay, I'd go, I'd do all these things, I'd travel on a Saturday or Sunday, but I got to ask the entrepreneur a lot of questions. And I'll never forget, I had my first kind of shock. At the time, Sears Roebuck was the largest retailer.
catalog mostly at that point.
No.
They were at stores at this point.
Physical and catalog, but physical.
Big deal for Goldman.
And and the founder of Sears and Roebuck, a Jewish family out of Chicago, what people don't know today, but he built hundreds of schools for kids in the South when it was segregated for them to go to school. Wow. Very interesting philanthropist he was. Okay. And so his name was Harvey Cooper, and he would not sell Sears. So I'm confused here. He was selling Montgomery Ward and all these other stores, but he didn't want to sell Sears, now the biggest. And they tried to do business with him. And he explained to me that their terms are too tough. They constantly want the ability to return items that aren't sold. They don't pay on time, and they take advantage of small manufacturers. He was a small swimsuit manufacturer. And therefore, even though they're the biggest, they're not a profitable account. So it got me thinking here, gosh, you're going to build a successful firm and not do business
With the biggest.
right. And so it gave me a real indication. But I think it was September of '57, Sputnik went up. And now I'm starting to think about space and things. And
What was it about space that was so interesting to you? Was it multi-terrestrial, like humans being able to go elsewhere? Was it more about safety? Was it the technology?
well, I've been reading comic books for a long time, okay? And I felt I fully understood space travel, okay?
What was your favorite comic book? I used to love comics.
I liked Marvel comic books, the Fantastic Four when it came out,
Captain America.
etc. But I also Superman, etc. But I liked the idea that one person could substantially make a difference. So I thought, listen, I've never missed a math problem. I can calculate base 2 and base 10 in my head and go back and forth. I learned how to multiply numbers in my head. You know, so when you say you're not like others, there are people that are amazing. So I had competed in college, they called it Knowledge Bowl, but I competed representing schools against other schools in different fields, math, science, English, literature, etc. I was generally the math science guy and the sports guy. So if there were questions on those three, those were mine.
Got it. And sport trivia, is that type of stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I discovered is they're actually human beings. If you told them a number, you know, what's 1,111 squared, they see it in their mind. And that came out in a couple movies about autistic people that have these very unusual. But
John Nash, those type of things.
these things actually exist. But I couldn't do that, so I studied a man named Trachtenberg and others. And when he was in concentration camps, they took away his paper, they took away his pen, they took away his books. And so he devised ways to do things to keep himself busy in his head. And so he showed you how you could multiply 4-digit numbers in your head faster than a calculator that didn't exist at the time. And so I studied all these things and made up new formulas so that if someone told me what's 107 times 103, I knew it was 11,021.
Get that?
Yeah.
Someone, you could do that.
Yeah.
No, not as quick as you
Not as
just
quick
did,
as you
but yeah.
But that, how does that lead to you deciding you have enough information, knowledge that you should write President Eisenhower?
Well, NASA didn't exist.
Really?
DARPA didn't exist. And, you know, what's so interesting, people think that this is their greatest day, or that this has changed the world. Sputnik going up marked the end of the Soviet Union. They thought it was their greatest day, that communism was superior, and the U.S. and, quote, capitalism, free enterprise system was inferior. But the mistake they made is they woke up the United States. So the Soviet Union's economy was the size of maybe Virginia, Maryland, okay, and North Carolina combined. So now you woke up someone whose economy is so much larger. And the country now took action. One, they made what we call today STEM education. So they made it cool to be a mathematician, a physicist, an engineer. They created programs in education to encourage you to work in this area. They created NASA and they created DARPA. So it didn't exist. Why can't? You know, I might as well apply. There's no one working for it. It didn't exist at the time. So the concept of the speed of light and Einstein and all these things intrigued me a great deal. I'm a Star Trek kid, you know, from the 60s watching that. And gosh, if you only can travel the speed of light, you can't get anywhere. Okay, you just can't get there. The nearest star to the United States is 4 light years. So if you could travel the speed of light, it takes 4 years to get there. It takes 4 years to send a message back. That's 8 years. Okay? Now, I do have a friend, Yuri Milner, that's building this solar sail. I don't know if you've ever visited with Yuri or not, but he's trying to find a way to travel at 1/5 the speed of light. It's going to take 20 years of development. It's going to take 20 years to get there. That's 40. It's going to take
20 years to get it back.
4 years to send a signal back letting us know if this planet that looks like Earth is inhabited. I told Yuri I just can't wait 44 years. Okay? It might be too late for me. So that, I then planned kind of my life to do that. And
But you still have this other, I mean, you're still involved with your dad's clients. You're learning about, wow, you can have this small company that doesn't need to sell to the big players to be successful. Your eyes are opening up on business and entrepreneurship at the same time. How were the two factoring in? Was one just a side thing with your father, or and it was?
Well,
really
I
about
was
space?
thinking of an entrepreneurial approach
To space
to
itself.
build the space program, right?
Right.
So I'd say one of the real positive things that I would encourage all young people to encourage their children is to go into debate and speech.
Yeah.
So the National Forensic League, I was fortunate that I was going to this 6-year school rather than a 3-year, what's now a middle school, and a 3-year high school, or a 2 years and 3 years in middle school, and then 4 years in high school. So at 7th and 8th and 9th grade, I was engaged with people that were older. And I had a debate partner who was brilliant. And when we were in 9th grade, we were now debating against 12th graders. So we learned every fact there was on the planet on the subject. And in debate, you have to be both sides.
Right.
And I remember we were at like a regional finals. We were the only 9th graders. Everyone else was 11 or 12. And we had a debate, and I think we won the first debate against a leading debate team in the state. And when it was over, they told us, you guys got to get a life, okay? I was just thinking of how obnoxious we might have been as 9th graders.
If they have to say that.
Right.
Knowing every single fact driving them crazy when they had other things in their life, you know, going on. But it gives you a chance, if you're in debate, to understand all sides of an argument, how to present your ideas in a short period of time, clear. Then you get a judge who's making a decision on whether you won or lost that debate. And so I think that was a very important part of leadership. And I think there's another thing. People that don't get to be a kid. So Michael Jackson was a close friend of my wife and Lori. He grew up a few blocks from me. He was just an unbelievable, caring individual. Tremendous misinformation and everyone that took advantage of him because he was so open. And he was a great father, too. But he never got to be a kid. Yeah. And so my debate partner never got to be a kid. His father was a judge. His mom was involved with the UN. They were much later in life. Because he was so smart, he accelerated into... He was my roommate the first year when I went to Berkeley. And then he accelerated again. And so he experienced his teenage years when he was in his 30s.
Right.
And so to me, I experienced my teenage years when I was 10.
Yeah.
I experienced my 20s when I was a teenager. And so if you've achieved success young, you don't really, in my opinion, need the accolades later in life.
Interesting.
And so,
got him.
Therefore, so I made a decision to go to Berkeley so I could pursue the potential to run our space program. It was the most number of people, Nobel Prizes in sciences when I went there.
So you were serious about the space thing. You really believed this is where you were going to do your life's work?
Well, there's trillions of planets. And what happens if something happens to Earth?
You got to pick another.
In all of the millennium, billions and trillions of years of time, you would never know humans existed.
Right. And we don't have a good plan B even today.
Well, Elon Musk is working hard to give you a plan B.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think Bezos also. And the idea is you get people off Earth onto another planet in our solar system, most likely Mars. But if something happened to our sun, then the world would change. Yeah. So that's why Yuri Milner is so focused on getting into the closest star. And there's planets that look like it, but really to explore, it's just hard when someone tells you it's 10,000 light years. So we don't really know what warp speed is. When they say warp 2, warp 3, what is that? But it's a lot faster than the speed of light. Okay, so I then changed again when the Watts riots hit here in LA.
That was a turning point.
So I had to give up this dream because I met this young African-American man who told me no one would ever loan him money because of the color of his skin.
Wow. Where'd you meet him?
The day after the Watts riots. I met him August 12, 1965.
Wow, I remember the date.
Well, I remember it because I got married on August 11, 68, so I would never forget what occurred that day here. So it was kind of the Vietnam War period. The free speech movement had already started at Berkeley, which kind of changed the country. Just as a digression, it's no accident that the free speech movement started at Berkeley, because you could see the world from the corner of Telegraph and Bancroft. The American Nazi Party, American Communist Party, the very popular Free Love Party, tables were there. But it was the first year the baby boomers went to college. This 1946 group was now in college, and their parents told them, one person can change the world. Okay, you can be whatever you want to be. You weren't dependent necessarily on the government for your safety, and they're now hitting college. They're asking the same question. Why is the university publishing the school newspaper?
Should be independent.
It should. The students should. I mean, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that?
Which was new for universities. They'd never been questioned in that way. This was the first time they were getting pushback from their own
Students.
customers.
Well, it's the first time the baby boomers, 1946 to 64, they were pampered by their parents. You wonder, why did polio become an epidemic?
Yeah.
Cancer never became an epidemic when you have millions of people diagnosed a year. But their parents, the schools changed because of the parents of the baby boomers, this group. The activist, middle-class parent demanding the best opportunities for their kids, and that many of them didn't have that opportunity in life. They had to go to work. They couldn't finish high school. They joined the military at 17 or 18 years old. So that part of their life was different, and they wanted the best for their children.
They wanted the American dream.
For their children.
For their children.
And were willing to sacrifice for
But here,
them.
this man that you meet doesn't have access during the riots, doesn't have access to the American dream.
He's looking at a building that he worked at that burned down. He didn't burn it down, but he didn't stop it. He didn't do anything. He's married, has a child, and when he wakes up in the morning, is not going to have a job and has no money. And he kept telling me it wasn't his company. He'd never have a company. He'd never have a plant. His father didn't have it. I grew up in LA. I didn't feel any discrimination in LA. You know, the entertainment industry was here. All races were here. It wasn't like an eastern city in that sense.
Yeah.
You know, they grew up. And so it opened my eyes again. Yes, we had a number of African Americans in our school, but they were more likely to be an athlete's child, an entertainer's child, etc. But it made me see the world differently, and it seemed totally irrational. Why aren't you investing in a person that has ability? Why are you making a decision to invest in a person based on what they look like? Not a good way to go about it. So I went back to Berkeley and changed my major to business and began to study credit. I was 19 years old. I just turned 19. And I started looking at all these histories. I checked out this book, Long-Term Credit Experience by a man named Bradford Hickman. And what did it show me? It showed me that the riskier things were perceived, the higher rates of return, even during the Depression.
Wow.
So in normal times, it would be a lot better, but even during the Depression,
Still.
and the worst credit was sovereign debt.
Interesting. So the debt that everybody thinks is all but guaranteed, turns out it's the high-risk debt from struggling companies that actually pays back more.
Well, in countries that were all rated AAA,
Because they were countries.
Countries rated AAA pay back less than countries.
they default. The whole
default.
history
Right.
is defaulting. I mean, there's countries today that have defaulted 13 or 14 times in their history. The U.S., because of Alexander Hamilton, was actually one of the first countries in the history of the world that didn't default. The debt was trading under 20 cents on the dollar. And Alexander Hamilton had a different strategy. He created a centralized currency instead of one for every colony or every state. And he bet on the future by opening up, going west. If the country succeeded, and so the U.S. did not default. It still was a terrible credit. When they inherited, it was one of the worst credits, but it never defaulted because of its potential and because of the people. But this feeling that everyone accepted, whether they're head of the Federal Reserve or head of the Treasury. Everyone said, oh, countries are the best credit.
And you rejected that.
Well, I didn't reject it. Facts and history rejected it.
And this book, it was the guy who ran the Cleveland Federal Reserve, right?
And he looked at every bond issued from 1900 to 1944.
Yeah.
So now I had discovered at a young age that most people have opinions, but nobody does research. And one of the more exciting points in my life as a young boy at 8 or 9 or 10 was my parents had these bridge clubs, and once a month they were at our house. Okay, so now I have 24 adults coming to my house that I can quiz, what do they know, etc. So you learn earlier, gosh, they don't know all the capitals, they don't know the longest rivers, they don't know the highest mountains, okay, but that's just facts. What about other things? And so in the game of bridge, one person sits out. Okay, and so I got now to interact with that adult, generally for about an hour or two,
Undivided
asking
attention.
questions.
Yeah.
And, you know, I didn't try to embarrass them by asking them what's the longest river or something, because I knew they wouldn't know that. But they didn't really know simple facts. So they had one adult that still remains to me. He was like the biggest baseball fan. He was from New York, moved to LA. So I asked him, you know, what has the farthest center field in baseball? Okay. It was one of the New York parks. Has no idea. Okay. So you learn, and then when you ask people, the one that really got me when I started asking about education and things about education, because that was one of the debate topics. And it came up later. And they just don't have a good feel, and nobody does research.
Right. Which can become your unfair advantage.
So you ask the person, well, okay, that's interesting. Where did you learn that? Well, someone told them, or someone told them. You can't find anyone that's actually looked at the facts. Now, today, using Google or AI, you can just go look up the facts.
Yeah, much easier.
Well,
Okay.
or what you think are the facts.
Well, if it's quantitative, not
Right.
qualitative, like how many people are living,
Right.
how many babies were born,
Right.
okay?
How big the biggest center field? You can actually know that quantifiably.
Exactly. You put that in a second, you're
Yeah.
going to know that. So it's different, but what I learned is it's rare that you can find the person that actually does research.
So you went and got the facts on credit.
And now you're at Drexel, and this concept.
Well, first
Well, you went to Wharton first. Yeah.
First I left Berkeley and went to Wharton.
Okay.
Then I went to work for the bluest blood firm in the country.
And why was it important for you to work at the blue blood firm as a Jewish kid
wasn't.
in California?
Yeah. Well, as a Jewish kid, I wasn't thinking about that. As a public school graduate, but the late 60s, financial firms were in serious trouble.
Okay.
And what was happening was interest rates were going up, and you required to physically deliver the securities. So if you bought 100 shares of stock, the institutions would not pay until you physically delivered that certificate.
Wow.
So now these pieces of paper are flying all over. So what did institutions discover? If I made you deliver to the First National Bank of Oregon in Portland, it doesn't exist anymore, but that was my custodian. It might take you 2 weeks to get it to me. So you paid for it. Now you take it down to a bank who sends it and drafts it out at this time. Then it gets to the First National Bank in Oregon or New Mexico, wherever you're sending it. Now, you discover, if you're really clever, that if it says you owe $13,323,000 something and 12 cents, and you know 14 cents, you do something called a DK. You don't know. You now send that piece of paper back to where it came from. That takes another week or so. And then you call and try to resolve it. That takes another week. So
Now you're a month in to buy.
3
Right.
weeks.
So today you buy stock instantaneously. Back then there's a 3 week.
No. You bought it instantaneously, but the buy that bought it doesn't pay until you deliver this piece of paper.
Yeah.
Okay, so interest expense for carrying this thing for 3 or 4 weeks now starts to exceed revenue.
Right.
So firms are failing. And so I was a finance, operations, and information systems major at school. So I agreed that I would come and solve their problem of the securities in exchange for them publishing my research.
This is at Wharton.
Right. I had done my credit work.
Yep.
And so I started as a consultant in late 1968.
At Drexel? Yeah.
As a consultant. And I began to work on what became a central depository with others where you don't deliver anything. But I created this map that should, if you're the customer and you want me to deliver to New Mexico before you pay, I'm not doing business with you, or I'm going to charge you a higher commission.
Yeah.
Okay? If you take delivery in New York, fine.
Much easier.
So these
You
things,
incentivize this efficiency.
well, you took advantage of people that were getting free float
Right,
for
you
2
charge
to
for
3
it.
weeks.
Yeah. No
Okay.
more free float.
And eventually you eliminated the delivery and created a central depository. But then they could publish my work on credit. And the firm was the reason I went there is they were the leading research firm at the time. But what I discovered when you went is that the highest paid people were in sales. You had fixed commission. You want to buy $1 million worth of Shopify? It costs you 1%, $10,000. Okay? Today, it might cost you $30.
Right.
But so the salesmen were making the money. And then I did a survey of the clients. The clients valued research the most, trading second, and sales the least. So you had this pyramid when I came to Wall Street that I wanted to reverse, where the fundamental bottom would be research. Can you at least know what you're selling and what the values are? Then can you buy and sell it? And lastly, if you can buy and sell it or trade it, then you can try to sell it to people. So it reversed the pyramid. When I first went to Wall Street, the number of people that were math majors or strong in math was very low.
Right.
Today, I would say many of the highest compensated people in the financial industry were math majors, quant funds, other types of things. So it's
So back then the customer's paying for what they value the least.
correct. And they were paying as a fixed commission. It's like recently that if you wanted to sell a house, it was a 6% commission. Okay? Now, it's always been negotiated if the price is higher, but the idea of a fixed commission, today, many people do it for a penny, 2 pennies, or nothing. Okay? And it's very similar to what happened in the telecommunication industry. So they had redlined, okay, it was a no-no to loan money to MCI.
Small company at the time, though.
Well, you had AT&T with 99% market share. They paid the most fees of any company in the world.
Okay.
They had the most employees. If you finance this young upstart MCI who was going to go to fiber optics, you essentially were giving up, you were going to be blackballed.
By AT&T.
Right. So you don't get their AT&T's perceived secure debt.
No, but you also don't get the fees as an investment firm
Right.
from all the money they're raising, et cetera, and
Right.
everything they're
All
gonna
the
do.
equity rounds, all the debt rounds.
That's
You're
correct.
out if you finance our competitors.
It doesn't sound like a meritocracy. It doesn't sound like something that is about entrepreneurship and capitalism.
Seems very un-American.
It seems very un-American.
Well, or very un-Canadian.
Or very
Very un-Canadian.
That's
yeah.
exactly right. So, how did you even meet the MCI guys? How did that even happen?
They were a firm, they had a new idea.
And you were taking
So-
meetings.
There weren't a lot of takers for these people, right?
So let's now talk about the 60s. What do you think from the normal person the weekly salary is?
In the 60s?
On Wall Street?
$150 a week in the country. Now you want to call Paris. You know what it costs for a long distance call? For 1 minute, per minute? $12.
Wow.
Okay. So if you want to make 12 minutes of long distance calls, you've wiped out your entire gross for the week.
That's right.
Okay. So it was a pretty good monopoly, right? And so I discouraged our people from, calling Geneva, Zurich, or other things because telecommunication costs were a big item in your business. I remember I called Ken Griffin about a year ago at Citadel. I was just interested, asking, Ken, what % of your revenue is telecommunications? He told me it's so low he doesn't even know. It's not an item they look at. And for young people, you can go on WhatsApp today, you pay $0
Right.
to speak to anybody, right?
Talk about deflationary.
So eventually I could trade the debt. I could be the major market maker in MCI debt, but we couldn't raise any money for him. And the chairman of the board of the company was on Continental Telephone's board. And he
Does not want to mess that up.
Right. Okay. So eventually, after about 3 years, I gave this talk. Gosh, AT&T has more than 1 million employees and MCI has 100. You're right. It doesn't seem fair. AT&T's AAA, MCI is maybe CCC, about as low as you get before you default. So I understood, but I've done all this analysis, and I told them, I don't really think it's fair. I think AT&T would need 1 million more people to compete with Bill McGowan, who was the CEO of MCI. So I told him, I think the deck is stacked in MCI's favor. And eventually they let us finance it.
This is not a quick thing. This is, you start talking to MCI, trying to help them get financing for 3 years. Wow. And was this one of your early big high yield debt deals?
No, there were others, but we in 81, I think we had the first chance. So they used to raise, if anyone in the world would give them a dime, the CEO, Bill McGowan, told me he spent 50% of his time raising money so he can make payroll. In 83, we did the biggest deal of all time. I gave them $1 billion. They only wanted 500, but they had to compete. So if you were AT&T, and let's say you're talking to IBM as a customer now, what are you going to tell IBM? How can you put your telecommunications network on MCI when you don't even know if they're going to be around?
Right.
Okay, it's too risky. So the idea was we'd put $500 million in cash on the balance sheet. It would sit there, and every time they'd tell a client, how do you know if MCI is going to be around?
We have $500 million on the balance sheet.
We have extra $500 million.
But where's this money coming from, right? I mean, that's an exorbitant amount of money back then. It's a lot of money today, and it's way, way more then. Who are you raising this money from?
Good question. So I wrote down in 1965 this formula, my prosperity formula, that financial technology, FT, served as a multiplier on the world's greatest asset, human capital and social capital, and real assets. And I had 5 goals. 1, we had to be able to make a market. If I want you to buy something, you also want to sell it. If you don't think there's any way to sell something, you're not going to be an investor. Okay, so the stock market, if I wanted to buy 100 shares of IBM at 9 o'clock and I change my mind at 10, I can just go sell it. So we have to be willing to commit to make a market in these securities. And we made a market in almost 7,000. So when I looked at Walmart, what they were trying to do over time, we had to be a Walmart that all these things you could buy and sell. Number two, we needed to create a lot of issuers. So we needed a lot of products for sale. We had to convince you that you want to do something. 1974 was the turning point. Probably the most important financial point in history was 74, post the Depression. Stock market goes down 50%. Business Week in December has the thing, no one will ever buy a stock again.
Whoa.
That lets you know it was time to go in, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Interest rates double. The government puts on credit controls that you can't loan money to new customers to deal with inflation. It was the first oil shock. So two young entrepreneurs like yourself, you thought you borrowed at X, it was floating, and now they're charging you twice as much at the end of the year.
Wow. Right. Big trouble.
And so you said, you know, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to sell longer-term fixed-rate debt. I'm going to know what the cost of my capital is. And so after that, it began a dramatic change. The other dramatic change was, yes, we needed to get issuers, so this period of time convinced the millions or thousands of businesses that they should go out and raise capital. There was only 500 companies that are investment grade. They had it good, okay? If you can imagine my excitement, I can go after millions of companies.
That are investment grade. Yeah.
And all the other people are focused on 500.
Yeah, you have your pick of the litter in that case. And not just that, you actually can go deeper with the companies you like because there's no one else competing for these deals.
If you can get the money.
If you can get the money. I mean,
Right? Because, yeah.
So the next thing is you need to get the investors.
Right.
So you asked a fantastic question. Who's going to invest in your next deal? Okay. So what happened in 74? There was something called the Nifty 50.
Yeah.
So these were 50 stocks you could buy. You never had to look at them again. You put them in your portfolio, you held them for the rest of your life, and you would become wealthy.
the FANG stocks of the time.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
50. They had an average PE multiple of 66. All right. Now, there were some great companies of the future in there, like Walmart. There were also companies like Polaroid, Avon,
Kodak. Yeah.
Kodak, etc. Okay. So, adjusted for inflation over 10 years, your rate of return for investing in the Nifty 50 was minus 90%.
Wow.
Okay? So now, a trust bank can lose 90% of my money adjusted for inflation. If you take out inflation, we're talking 30 or 40%. So why do I have my money at a trust bank? Why don't I give it to a mutual fund? Why don't I give it to another money manager? They can't do any worse than the guys I gave it to for riskless investing.
Right.
Better losing.
Okay? And so this began the growth of the money managers. If you look at how little of Fidelity was then. And now, after this experience of 74, the world changed. So when I ran around in 74 and told everyone this is the greatest buying opportunity of all time, look what happened during the Depression, most people were skeptical.
Sure.
And, you know, I remember some of the major financial institutions told me, I was the head of research, do not have anyone under 30 come and talk to us, okay? Because we need perspective. Now, at that time, I was 26, okay? So I told them I would not bring anyone under 30 with me. Okay, there. So I was 30 for like 6 years.
Wow.
And
And this is before venture capital. This is before any type of equity investors were coming to these great innovative companies and offering them capital too.
right, I would say this was a period of time when your established companies had access to capital. And so right after the Watts riots, I had started to read Gary Becker's work. And he wrote this piece in the 60s on why irrational behavior could be rational. Why people are taking actions that don't seem to make any sense and why they're making those decisions. But I had concluded the most important element was the individual, the management, the leadership in a company. And so my view was I would be focused on who the management team is, what their ideas are, and the meek would inherit the earth. Okay, but they couldn't inherit the earth unless someone gave money. So Bill McGowan was a force of nature. His vision for the future of telecommunications, everyone should thank him, but he needed billions of dollars, and they wouldn't give it to him. And 3 years after we financed him, AT&T was broken up with a legal challenge. It lasted only 3 years. And so if you look at the period from 1970 to 2000 in America, investment grade or large companies had the same growth rate as the non-investment grade companies up until about 76. Then the curve accelerates for non-investment grade companies, new ideas, new businesses, and it decelerates. And so more than 60 million jobs were created by new companies in the last 30 years of the 20th century, and -4 by your investment grade companies. Once they had to compete now and with access to capital.
Is that because of culture?
What?
Is that because of culture? I mean, you talk about betting on people. You know, it's less about who you know, but what you believe they can do. Do you think that the incumbents, when they had to compete with the smaller players who didn't previously have access to funding, lost because of culture, because of the people that were running various companies?
It's there's many things that should happen in terms of, can you keep a culture in a big company? Okay, can you keep a culture as the company grows? It's difficult. So Sears, Walmart. Walmart grew not by buying companies, but by taking a concept that worked and doing it time and time again. A company like Panda Express, where their founders came from Myanmar, Taiwan, etc., they found something that works and they did it time and time again. And so they duplicated that effort. It's not unusual that you have outsiders change things. If you looked at the entertainment industry and went back in time as to who made movies, who were your entertainment companies that grew up, every single person that founded them was an outsider. The person that founded Fox, the person that founded Warner, the person that founded Columbia, the person that founded Universal, every MGM. One of the interesting things, if you go back in history, is it appears every founder lived within 200 miles of Warsaw.
Wow.
So you had this.
You're talking about Poland.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
All Jewish.
Every founder of every major studio you just mentioned
Lived
within 200.
And almost all of them were Jewish. So they were outsiders. They came here. They weren't establishment. And they made films and stories, in many cases, of hope. Think during the Depression, of hope. Yes, you made movies like Gone with the Wind and A Realization, but you wanted people to believe there were hope, whether it was those musicals and dancing and everything, they were singing in the rain, and you start to think what was coming on. And it's so interesting. You had a culture. Now, you had challenges. So at the same time you had those, you had 3 television networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC. The government consent decrees broke up the movie companies first that they couldn't own the theaters. So if they owned all the theaters, no competitor could get their movies theoretically or had to ask for permission.
Although today we'd call that vertical integration.
Yes.
But at that point it was non-competitive.
And for the three networks, they passed a regulation that you couldn't own the content and the distribution. So they separated. So CBS, its content moved to a company called Viacom. Later they were put back together. So these were outsiders, they were entrepreneurs, etc. And
has that been your sort of your view after an incredible career, that the people that tend to build the most ambitious things, the most innovative, disruptive things, tend not to come from inside those industries with the baggage that comes with it, but rather they are tourists to those industries?
That's one. It's something to be, as the two of you know, an entrepreneur or founder. It's different. The stock market crash of 1987, when it went down 20%.
That was Black Friday?
Yeah. So that's the only month in my entire life we ever lost money. But we lost a little money. At 2 a.m, everyone that was at their desk at 2 a.m, that worked with us, whether they're in Australia, Europe, Asia, wherever it was, were the entrepreneurs. They weren't the employees. Trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow? I've had many CEOs come. I remember one running an airline came, and he had a strategy. And I said to him, well, what happens if that strategy doesn't work? And he says to me, the die is cast. This is our plan. If it doesn't work, we'll be out of business. I didn't finance that company.
Of course.
Interesting. Because no ability for self-discovery and to readjust.
Well, as entrepreneurs, the world you think it's going to be, something changes, and you have to adjust to it. And if you're not flexible or you don't see the change. So going back to your question of what happened and where did the investors come from?
Yeah.
They came from those that understood, number one, even though they didn't believe when I visited them in 74. By 1976, you made 100% on your money owning straight debt, no leverage, in 2 years. So yes, the ideas stood the test of time. There's a famous professor that was on a panel with me in 74 who had predicted that 700 of the 2,000 largest companies in America were going to file for bankruptcy. I gave a talk and said, well, if you look at the Depression, out of those 700, you'll be lucky if 1% file for bankruptcy. New York State debt was at 20 cents on the dollar, New York City, and so on. But if you looked at all history, you would find the best credit were organizations, then you have individuals, and the worst was government. So it was exactly the reverse. But they didn't necessarily believe when you told them that.
Right.
They had a much stronger belief when they missed out on doubling their money in 2 years. Okay, and the failure of the Nifty 50 invested created the people willing to invest. So now the market was there, the issuers were there because of what occurred, and now the investors were there.
And that created the perfect opportunity.
Mike, you said, great investors are social scientists. I thought that was interesting. Not scientists, not journalists. Why social scientists?
If you go to business school, what do they teach the kids? First, they teach them about regression analysis. What is the risk of regression analysis? It's based on the past. And
it assumes things continue.
Right. It assumes the future will be like the past. Well, with new technologies, computers 1 million times faster, data storage costs 1 billionth, the future's not going to be like the past. So that's the first problem you have. Second, people change. When you tell me it's a great company, I say to you, it's a great company because of the people that work for that company. We'll see in the future whether it's a great company. So let's talk about a question you had asked. And I just want to finish. So you study the company, you study the industry, you study capital markets, and you learn the best time to raise money is when you don't need it, and the worst time to raise money is when you need it. And lastly, you study the economy. Those are the four things that when you go to school, you study. What you don't study is regulation. You can pass regulation that will put any company out of business tomorrow, whatever that regulation wants to be. In the case of MCI and AT&T, AT&T introduced regulation every month that would make it impossible for them to pay the switching fees to get onto AT&T network, so they couldn't handle the costs. But you can think of all kinds of regulations today related to energy and other things that make things uneconomic. And then the most important element is society. How does society feel? Is what you're doing beneficial to society or not beneficial to society? Because if society feels what you're doing is not beneficial, regulation will follow. So, and it sometimes takes a long time. Let's talk about cigarettes. The first inclination, or the first indication, I should say, was about 1939, that there's a link between lung cancer and cigarettes. And it might not be good for you to be smoking. Now, the cigarette companies were fantastic marketers, okay? Almost everybody endorsed cigarettes. Number one, doctors.
Right.
Okay? They even had babies in cigarettes. The Flintstones had cigarette ads. I mean, you name it, baseball players, and you name it, whoever it was. And so things were changing over time. In the 1980s, the most valuable brand in the world was still Marlboro.
Wow.
Okay? But then something happened. There was a change. They made documentaries. Things were released. And eventually the largest cigarette. In 1989, at one point, the most valuable company in the world was Philip Morris at one point in time. But society had turned, and Altria is no longer the most valuable company in the world. And taxes were put on, etc. So society responds, and financial markets often have a good solution. If you looked at the 1980s, sulfur dioxide, SO2, in the air, these clouds hung over the industrial part of the country, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, etc. And we're all movies, we're all going to die of acid rain.
Right.
Okay? So what happened? You use financial markets. And one of my partners, the government created regulation that you had to reduce your SO2 emissions. If you couldn't, you had to go buy these credits. If you could reduce it more, you got credits. It actually became economic to buy a plant that was a huge emitter of SO2 and shut it down because the credits were worth more.
Wow.
And so in 15 years, it was over. You created financial markets that eliminated SO2 by creating incentives teamed up with government regulation.
The greatest strategy is an economic strategy. But I think to your point, where you marry social, human nature and also a problem to solve, and you use money to actually decide that and strategize around it, you actually get massive results.
So if you look at a person in the news today like Elon Musk, I did an interview with him this year to try to outline what was he thinking when he was in school. So I was thinking, access to capital. I was thrust into medical research because of family, etc. And what was he thinking about? He was thinking about educating everyone on the planet and leveling the playing field. So Starlink. every single person could have access to knowledge and education wherever they are in the world once someone built a system to access it. He was thinking, oh, we better get human beings off planet Earth just as a hedge in case something ever happens. Okay, SpaceX. So he was thinking, boy, the solution is electric cars, and we'll figure out how to power the power plants that create the power. So there's a link between his actions and what kind of the path he's gone on after he and Jeff Skoll and everyone got together on PayPal together. But if you talk to Jeff, he will be telling you that Elon was talking about all these things.
Way back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he is executing on a vision that he had, and society was behind him on the electric car. So the government wanted that.
Yeah, which made it easier.
Private industry substantially reduces the cost of space. It's still very expensive. And I went over to Jet Propulsion Laboratory for the simulated landing of the Mars rovers with my good friend David Baltimore. Let's see, Schwarzenegger was there, Gore was there, and I took 2 of my sons.
Cool.
And so what was it all about? They had a person from private industry manage it, and you broke it into teams. One team was what goes in the rover. A lot of arguments. I want this experiment, you want that experiment. We only can have so much weight. What are we going to do if it gets there? So that's the first team. Now they have to get it off Earth into orbit. That's the second team. Now the next team takes it out of Earth orbit and has to get it to Mars in Mars orbit. Now the next team has to get it out of Mars orbit onto the planet. And so you had a systems engineering challenge, okay, with different groups. And so I remember that day the cheering as each event occurred, each group cheering. So it's my belief that the free enterprise industry has been the greatest vehicle for us to achieve what we've achieved, and entrepreneurs like the 2 of you. But you needed financial access to financial capital to make your dreams come true, and then you make your dreams come true for everyone.
Well, you certainly did that. I mean, over $250 billion of leveraged buyouts. I think 60% of the entire junk bond market went through you at one point in time.
Well, yeah, there were plenty of competitors, but I would say, what was our secret sauce? Research. Focused on the management team. That's not on the balance sheet. There's only one industry that puts people on the balance sheet, is sports.
Right.
You put your player contracts on the balance sheet.
Yeah. Interesting.
But let me sort of close with this, because we want to be respectful of your time, and we're getting the hand waves now.
Well, you can edit whatever you
Oh, that's good. Well, I will say this. Dave and I did a ton of research on you, Mike, for this interview. We went to your stories, your family, the businesses, the impact you've had in the world. On the way over here today, there was this one quote that David and I kind of kept going back to. I'm going to read it to you. It's a quote, I think, from your father, which was, "No one can have a truly meaningful life unless everyone has a chance." And one of the common threads across all these stories, all things you've done, is you have given people a chance that otherwise would not have had the chance. And I think the reason you're able to speak with such passion and conviction about the meaning that these things have given you is because you haven't just democratized capital or lending, you've democratized opportunity. And I think that, I don't know if that's what you consider to be your legacy, but as 2 entrepreneurs ourselves, what David and I admire most about you is what you've done in that way. You have given more people a chance, and that's created incredible meaning for you.
So yesterday I taught math and entrepreneurship at the very catchy school called Milken High, okay? And so, you know, there's this saying, you learn more from your students. So I go and teach young people to see what they're thinking. I give them super mathematical powers so that they understand the importance of math. But I also really focus on what's important in life, that they're focused on that, and whether someone send them or defriended them on Facebook is not a big deal in the scheme of history. And I think the thing that shocked me the most is that people don't really realize that the number one driver of the world's economy is health and medical research. It's really, they don't think about it today. But if you look at the entire history of the last 11,000 years of human development, there are periods for 1,000 years there are almost no increase in population, no increase in per capita income. And then something happened in the last couple hundred years. And it's easy to see by telling you you've had more than a doubling of life expectancy. You know, when life expectancy on the planet at the start of the 20th century was 31 years of age, just think neither of you would be here today, right? If you were that. And in this country, it was 50.
Well, I mean, we didn't even get into this, but what you've done for medical research is nothing short of astounding. I mean, you nowadays, biohacking, the idea of you are what you eat, gut microbiome are some big concepts, but I don't think our listeners truly appreciate that you were, I mean, you were the spark that lit all those fires.
If you went to the National Cancer Institute in 1993, the people they hated the most were first, cigarette manufacturers, and second, people promising false hope, like what you ate had an effect on your cancer. And in '94, I put on our annual scientific retreat, and I wanted to bring a man named David Heber to speak, founder of the Center for Human Nutrition, PhD, MD. And they told me that we would lose all credibility if we're starting to talk now about microbiome and nutrition.
Wow.
Soft science.
Soft science is what they called it.
We reached an agreement that as long as he wasn't on the program, so people that got the program didn't know, and he would only speak at lunch when people didn't have to necessarily listen, he could be on the program. 25 years later, 2019, I'm going to our scientific retreat, which consists of maybe 800 of the world's leading scientists in the medical area, mathematicians, computer scientists, physicists. And I'm looking at the program, almost a quarter of the program, 20 to 25% of the program is your microbiome and cancer, your microbiome and health. Can you reverse disease by the microbiome? And so thanks to technology and sequencing today, we know if I don't change your genes, but your children or your children's children will have their genes adjusted using CRISPR technology to eliminate certain diseases. But I can change how they're expressed by changing my microbiome. And so it's 24 years, 25 years later, and there's a whole different view today. And there are numerous biotech companies today and others focused on if maybe I can even slow down and reverse Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, not just cancer, by adjusting your microbiome. So science and research has come to the fore. But so my life, I would say, is somewhat of a bookend today. Yes, I had the honor of financing 3,000 companies, and it'd be hard for people to believe today that the hardest industry to finance at all, by far, was mobile cellular. No one believed. Even the founder of the technology didn't believe in it, AT&T. Okay, even they didn't believe. And people didn't understand, I have a telephone, why do I need that? You know, but I said I was a Star Trek kid, and the communication device is where you were. Captain Kirk's device was here.
Yeah.
Told some Scotty to beam him up.
Right.
Mike, Harley and I were talking about this on the way over. I mean, your ability to see around corners has been nothing short of remarkable. For the young Mike Milken listening to this now, what are you seeing today? Like, what do you see ahead of us?
Well, first, I want to stress it's the people. Okay? You can have dreams, but someone has to make them a reality. So Steve Jobs founded Apple. They forced him out of the company he founded. In 1997, it was on the verge of bankruptcy. What many people don't know is that one of the reasons it didn't go bankrupt is Microsoft loaned them money. Now you say, why would Microsoft loan Apple money? Do you know?
No.
Microsoft was under regulatory review for monopolizing software. There was one company that had its own software systems named Apple. They needed Apple to survive, to exist.
Wow.
Now, if you went back in history, you can ask yourself, why does Microsoft exist? Well, IBM was under scrutiny as a monopoly.
Right.
So they couldn't own the software and the hardware. They made a mistake, not understanding it was the software that was valuable, not necessarily the hardware. But if the movie The Matrix had come out a few decades earlier, maybe they would have seen that the machines and the humans had to team up to fight the software to win. So there's a lot of things in history, but the underlying factor is I had this idea on mobile, but it took Craig McCall and John Stanton and Rufus Lumry and that whole group, Wayne Perry, to make it a reality. I had a belief in adult Disneylands, but it took Steve Wynn to make that a reality.
Whom you financed.
Yeah.
Along with Ted Turner
No, I
and a host of other...
Ted Turner had an idea
Yeah.
of a station, of an all-news 24-hour station, but of a super station that everyone could get access to. But then you needed someone like John Malone to help build the cable industry at the time. So you can have great ideas, but unless you have great people, and maybe one of the lessons to be learned is you need to be able to change. So what company for decades was, if you wanted to become a great manager, who would you go to work for to learn?
McDonald's?
McKinsey, BCG,
GE.
Gee, right. Jack
Welch.
Welch.
Okay, so GE, and before him, Reginald Jones. All right. So what did they do? They went on and built a team of people, and they identified who they thought were the 32 future leaders, and they monitored them, and they moved them around, and they ran different divisions. And as a big company, they gave you a chance to run multi-billion-dollar businesses. Then they narrowed it to 16. Then they narrowed it to 5. And they picked one, and the other 4 left and ran other companies. Okay. What happened? What didn't they adjust to? They didn't adjust to the growth of private equity, which is the other one of 2 pieces in the puzzle. Yes, you had to start trading. You needed issuers. You needed investors. But you needed to securitize so that you weren't buying an individual and you could buy 100 different things. First major thing was the securitization of mortgages, then auto loans. So people today can get a lower rate on their mortgage than if it was just them, because you're one of 1,000 or 1,000,000 in a package. And it's hard to discriminate when you don't even know who the people are that you own their mortgages, okay? And lastly, you needed to combine ownership and management. So as I came in the 60s, I discovered that the utility curve of the owners was often not in the best interest, or the utility curve of the shareholders. So a whole industry grew up, private equity. And we started to finance where the owner picked the management and the management was focused on the owner. And today, there's more than 30,000 companies controlled by what you would call their private equity funds. And there's more large companies in the US now that are owned by private equity or controlled than are public today. So you had to link that management. But the key is the manager. So let's look what happened to GE. There was Jack Welch, and then there was a new team that came on. And I visited with the new member when he was picked, the first one, and told him that he would be the last one because of private equity. If you're one of those 32 and you've already run a billion-dollar company and you are a private equity or you're an owner, you're going to go recruit them. And what are you saying to them? You're saying to them, I'm giving you equity.
Yeah, you get ownership.
You're going to be the CEO. Right now, you're only 1 of 32.
Right, you're a partner.
You're a partner.
Okay. Now you're down to 16. Now many of the who would have been the 16 are gone. Now you're in the 16. You're now running even a bigger business. And the number one recruiting area then, in that point in time, is let's go look at who's running these businesses, and we're going to hire them to be our CEO. Yeah. So by the time you get down to the 5, all you have left is the rejects, right? The people that no one. So you were the leading trainer of managers, but everyone came to your university to recruit.
Right.
Let's talk about family businesses. The son or the daughter inherits from the parents. Then the grandchildren inherit, and then the great-grandchildren. 90 some odd percent, 96% of all companies are gone by the time you hit. So if you decided, okay, who's the most talented person to run this business or build this business, if you're limited to just your immediate relatives, that's a pretty small pick, right?
Definitely.
Okay, and so you do that for a couple of generations. It's hard. If you've been really successful, do your grandchildren have the same drive that you had? Maybe not.
Unlikely.
They might be flown on a private plane, and you never flew in a private plane.
Maybe you've never been on a plane.
Okay, so it's very hard to pass on that energy from one generation to another. And as we protect our children, it becomes harder to pass on because you learn so much. What has made the United States and maybe Canada to a certain degree different than all other countries in the world has been you've had a chance, you could fail, and you get another chance. Okay, I never wanted to hire a trader that hadn't lost their shirt on a trade because I know I was going to get destroyed because they learn substantially more. You know, not everyone's first, company works out, but they learn so much from one that didn't. And so I particularly like to find that entrepreneur that's a serial entrepreneur that's not only had success, but's had a failure. Because if you only had success in your life, we don't know how you're going to act when something goes wrong.
You gotta shake it off, get back in the game.
Yeah, so I'd say bookends for me, my father talking to me about everyone having a chance, and for the last 11 plus years, we've been building this center for advancing this dream.
Yeah. And this will be in D.C.
D.C., across from the White House and the Treasury.
I assume that was very specific and particular. You wanted it there?
Well, I had an idea of Malibu. I bought all this land in Malibu, but then they told me we couldn't have more than 200 people visit a day. They don't want any traffic. Okay. So, but a chance to buy the old Riggs Bank building, which had the safety deposit boxes for every single president in them after Lincoln.
Wow.
But across from the White House and the Treasury, hopefully this will be a beacon of hope that every single person can find someone like them.
This is a big project for you. About $500 million is going into this.
Well, our original budget was a few $100 million. Our current budget is over $1 billion. So yes, it's a big project, but my goal is that my grandchildren will grow up in a country that still believes in financial literacy, believes in economic independence, believes in medical research, believes in the entrepreneur and innovation, and believes in the importance of the educator. So we're filming 10,000 people, their stories. If you grew up and didn't know who your father was, we got plenty of stories for you of people that didn't know who their father was, or who lived in a homeless shelter, or lived in foster care, or came from 100 different countries in the world to come here.
In many ways, what we're trying to do with Big Shot, with this project, is to tell stories of people who are unlikely to have been successful because of their background, because of where they come from. These stories of perseverance and chutzpah and audacity, and specifically for Jewish entrepreneurs. But let me sort of cast a wider net here as we finish up. I want to say on behalf of, frankly, every entrepreneur on the planet, Mike, thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for giving more people an opportunity to find their own versions of success. In some cases, that may have been they wanted to build a $100 billion company. In other cases, it may have been they just want to put food on their table.
Or to coach a Little League team.
Or coach a Little League team, and be able to do that. David and I we pray at the altars of entrepreneurship, but you are truly one of the best we've ever encountered, and we're so grateful you gave us your time today.
Well, number one, thank you. I've had
so much, Mike.
Thousands of partners along the way, many of them who you've interviewed or are going to interview along the way.
Appreciate that.
This has been incredible. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom.